Limitless Mind is a special, special book. As you know, on Dreamland, it's about empowerment, and we have gone down many, many different paths toward empowerment. And Russell Targ is a man who has had a long life in search and spiritual and intellectual search of the most fruitful kind. He was one of the founders of the Stanford Research Institute's remote viewing project, along with Hal Puthoff and some others, that has become one of the foundations of new consciousness in our world. So, Russell, I'm very, very happy to welcome you to the radio program again. We've been together before, and it has always been an extraordinary experience, and I'm sure it will be again this time, because it seems to me that you have suddenly focused in a quite extraordinary way that enables us to focus with you. And why don't we begin by talking a little bit just about in the early parts of the book, Gene Houston's foreword talks about something that figures importantly in the book, and I want to begin with this. She refers to it as our quantum hologram essence. Our minds may well be omnidimensional. And can you talk a little bit about this, because this is one of the foundations of what you're discussing throughout the book.
I'm happy to do that, and I thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to be on your program.
No, my pleasure.
What Gene Houston is talking about, what I agree with, is that who we are is a non-local awareness rather than a physical body. So this is a radical idea that Buddhists have talked about for 2,500 years and has now come out of our work and the work of other scientists as very evident. We're able to quiet our mind in the laboratory or in the living room and describe and experience what's happening in far distant places and even in the future. And this work has been very well replicated, as you know, Whitley.
Oh, yes.
So what that means is that we could not possibly be simply a physical body because our awareness is non-local. Our awareness is able to expand and move through all of space-time. So what it appears is that who we are is really a non-local awareness residing for a time as a physical body, which is exactly what mystics have said since the beginning of metaphysical writing, that we have a body, we should take good care of it because we understand that bodies are hard to come by, but our essence is this non-local awareness. And saying that we have non-local awareness is not some kind of metaphor or metaphysical idea. We've demonstrated through now 25 years of laboratory research that a person can learn to quiet his mind and experience what's happening far, far from his physical body. So there's a kind of holographic connectivity where your little head is located at a particular place in space-time, but from that location where your physical body is, you are without a doubt able to describe and experience things that are happening anywhere in space and at least a few days into your future. So we really have that non-local capability that Gene Houston was talking about.
Now, in the book, you mentioned the some of the work of Charles Honorton and Darrell Bem. And I have read their papers, and I got the impression that one of the papers suggested that it might be that something about the mind would kind of go non-local in a quantum physical sense when you relaxed. And
well, what Honorton and Bem were doing was work at Cornell University, where Bem is located, and Honorton was in Princeton, New Jersey. They had experiments in the so-called Ganzfeld, where a psychic would be in a electrically and acoustical shielded room in a stimulus-free environment, and he would have ping pong ball halves over his eyes to give him a uniform homogeneous field, and a white noise into his ears. So he's in a kind of altered state of consciousness where noise is coming to his ears, sort of seashore noise. Pink light is going to his eyes, and he's asked to free associate with regard to what his friend in another booth is looking at. So this is contemporaneous telepathy, it looks like. So as though I'm sitting here looking at a railroad engine chugging over a bridge, you're in another place with your eyes closed with no stimulus at all pertaining to me, and you're asked to describe simultaneous with me, what are you experiencing? So that's the Gansfeld. And that worked very, very well. And those experiments...
It means, Gansfeld means whole field.
Gansfeld is whole field.
Right.
And these experiments with one cubicle connecting with another cubicle across space and time was pioneered by Charles Honorton in his laboratory at Princeton. And he then collaborated with Darrell Bem, who is a well-known psychologist at Cornell, to write a groundbreaking paper published in the Psychological Bulletin.
An amazing place for it to be published, because the Psychological Bulletin, which I read, is mostly about the mechanics of the brain, I would say, and brain science. It doesn't...
That's right. This was peer-reviewed, went through a lot of scrutiny and discussion at Psychological Bulletin, and they basically said, we hate to admit it, but there's nothing the matter with this paper. It looks like something like mind-to-mind connection actually is occurring.
As I recall, they even published a separate article about it, about the paper.
Yes.
Yeah, saying essentially that we are letting this in because we have to, essentially.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, editors tend to do that. When we published our first paper in Nature, describing the work we did with Uri Geller and Pat Price in the early days of Stanford Research Institute, the editor of Nature felt called upon to put in a kind of disclaimer, we don't know how this works, but it looks important.
Now tell us a little bit about this. Let's start with talking about the wonderful beginnings of this whole project. How did the SRI project begin?
Well, in the beginning, I had been working with a ESP teaching machine that I built by myself, and I had been lecturing about that and was invited to talk to a NASA conference on speculative technology about Russian and American ESP research. And out of that conference in 1972, I got to meet Arthur C. Clarke and Werner von Braun and a number of luminaries from NASA and from the futurist community. And NASA agreed to give me some money to set up a program at Stanford Research Institute to help astronauts get more in touch with their spacecraft. That I had done a lot of laser work in my earlier incarnation for NASA, so NASA knew that I was a real scientist and could build stuff and make it work. And I had this teaching machine with Jim Fletcher, who's the administrator of NASA, did quite well with, demonstrating that even an administrator has psychic ability. So they gave me
an astonishing discovery that still hasn't been fully understood.
That's right. So they gave us a little money. They gave us $80,000 to investigate whether people could learn to get in touch with the part of themselves that's psychic, and that was a successful experiment. And together with similar money from the CIA that started the program at SRI, Hal Puthoff and I started that in 1972.
Two very catalytic minds. I know Hal also, of course, and he's a dear friend and a wonderful, wonderful guy.
We're like twins born together and reared apart. You may not know. Hal and I are both laser physicists, as you know.
Yeah, he said something like that to me about you once.
And we're both born in Chicago. We're only children. And for some mysterious reason, our first job after leaving graduate school was with the Sperry Gyroscope Company. And I was working for Sperry in New York, and he was working for Sperry in Florida, but we're working on the same project, even though we never met.
Now, do you think you may have made a pact between the lives, or do you believe in reincarnation at all?
Oh, I think the evidence that some aspect of us survives, the evidence of that is very good.
It is very good, yeah. So perhaps you and Hal intended this.
Well, we then met in '72, where he gave a lecture at Stanford that I attended, and it sounded to me very much like the kinds of lectures that I gave on the same subject. So we became friends at that point, and the program came out of that. But we had followed a similar trajectory, but had not met until '72. Even though we were both laser scientists and interested in psychic stuff.
Which is kind of, it's an unusual but sort of understandable combination in a funny way, because they're both about the kind of leading edge of signaling in a strange way. One of them in the physical world and one of them in this other part of the world. Do you think that psychic things are a part of the natural world and physical, or just what does the supernatural mean to you?
Well, the physics chauvinist, that is, physicist, thinks that anything can be explained. I think that with the increasing currency of the idea of non-locality, that we have a quite good handle on how psychic ability works. The idea of non-locality says that in the universe, things that appear to be separate from one another are actually connected. Now, the experiments that have been done in the physics laboratory all pertain to elementary particles going off in opposite directions. But the fact that we see this kind of entanglement, and the idea of entangled photons and entangled states over kilometer distances gives us a place to begin to describe psychic ability.
This is Whitley Strieber, and it's using my psychic ability. I can assure you we're going to be back in just a couple of minutes with more Dreamland. Russell Targ, a legend in our time, Limitless Mind, his most focused, most empowering book ever. Don't miss it. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. This is one of those books that you really need. You can actually use in the most practical possible way to take yourself beyond where you are now. Russell Targ, Limitless Mind. It's quite real. Get it from the unknowncountry.com store. This is Whitley Strieber, and I was right, psychically. We are back. This is Dreamland, and we're talking to Russell Targ. I'm not afraid to call him a legend in our time. Russell, why don't you tell us your website address, if you will?
I have an easy website address. I'm at espresearch.com.
Finally, somebody who managed to actually get a .com that was relevant to what they do. You must have gotten that back in the dark ages.
Yeah, they saved that for me. I got that a few years ago. And on the website, I describe books that I'm writing and publishing and remote viewing workshops that I carry out here and there.
And we are talking in sort of general terms about Russell Targ and the work of Russell Targ and Limitless Mind, a guide to remote viewing and transformation of consciousness. And Russell, I want to get into one of the most arresting parts of the book is why remote viewing is actually a spiritual experience, and what it has to do with transformation of consciousness.
In remote viewing, it's necessary to quiet your mind and give up the idea of guessing and analysis when you try and describe a distant place. What you find yourself doing in a remote viewing experiment or in learning to do remote viewing at home, somebody will have an object for you which they've hidden away and say, I've got an object, tell me about it.